Back in the bone-chilling winter of 1882, a poker game in a dusty Cheyenne saloon cost a fella more than his money. It cost him his own daughter. Now, we all have heard tales of the Wild West, but I reckon few are as heartbreaking or twisted as the story of Vivian Miller and the mountain man they only called Bear Connecade. It all started when her daddy screamed, "She is deaf, just take her. She is no good to me." The whole saloon went dead quiet. But what came next was not just an act of cruelty, it was the start of a deep and dangerous secret. Because when that giant of a man lifted her onto his horse, he did not look at her teeth or check to see if she could hear. He just leaned in close and whispered 6 words that would change everything. "I know you can hear me." This here is the story of the quiet that ended up saving them both. It was October 14th, 1882. They were in the Iron Horse Saloon right on the edge of Cheyenne, out in Wyoming territory. The air in that place was thick with the smell of old sawdust, sweat-soaked denim, and the bite of bad rye whiskey. Right in the middle of it all sat Jedediah Miller. He was a small man, not worn down by years, but shriveled up by whiskey and weakness. His hands trembled as he stared down at the cards on that beat-up oak table. Sitting across from him was maybe the meanest man in the whole territory, an enforcer for a big cattle baron named Colt Ransom. Ransom never smiled. He just tapped a long finger on a stack of gold coins that Jedediah had no way of matching. And standing right behind Jedediah's chair, as still as a fence post, was his daughter, Vivian. She was 19 years old, but being half-starved made her look a whole lot younger. Her dress was faded calico with more patches than original cloth, and she kept her eyes glued to the floor. To everybody in Cheyenne, Vivian Miller was just a ghost who could not speak. She had not said a single word in 6 long years, not since her mama passed from the typhoid fever. Jedediah told everybody she was deaf and dumb, a cross he had to bear out of the goodness of his heart. "Play or fold, Jed," Ransom growled, his voice sounding like rocks tumbling in a creek bed. Jedediah swallowed, his throat dry. He was holding a full house, kings high. He was sure he could win, but he did not have a single thing left to bet. His desperate eyes scanned the room, finally landing on the girl standing behind his chair. "I ain't got no more coin," Jedediah stammered with sweat popping out on his forehead. "But I got labor." He snatched Vivian's wrist, yanking her forward so hard she nearly fell. She did not make a single sound. She did not even let out a gasp. Her face stayed as calm and empty as a winter sky. "She is strong," Jedediah slurred, the whiskey making him bold and foolish. "She can cook and she can clean, and she never talks back 'cause she cannot hear a blessed thing. The girl is deaf as a stone." Ransom looked her over, a sneer twisting his lips. "I am not running a charity house, Jed. I want my money." "She is worth $50 in work," Jedediah yelled, his voice cracking. "Take her. She is deaf. Take her and we can call it even." The noise in the saloon just died. Even the piano man's hands froze over the keys. Selling off your own kin was not unheard of in the toughest parts of the West, but there was something in Jedediah's voice that just soured a man's stomach. Ransom glanced down at his own cards. He was holding 4 of a kind. This was a sure thing. He looked at the girl and saw a servant he could use up and throw away. "Fine," Ransom said and laid his cards on the table. "The girl covers the 50. Let us see what you got." Jedediah threw his cards down like he had won the world, but his smile melted when Ransom showed him 4 jacks. "You lose, old man," Ransom said, getting to his feet and reaching for Vivian's arm. "Come on, girl." Vivian flinched. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable, but she was bracing herself. She had spent 6 years pretending she could not hear to get away from her father's angry fits, to get away from the rough men he brought around. Being silent was her only shield. But now, that shield was about to be broken. Before Ransom's fingers could wrap around her arm, a shadow fell across their table. It was so big it blocked out the light from the oil lamps overhead. Every soul in that bar looked up. Standing there was a man who looked less like a man and more like a grizzly bear that had learned to walk upright. He had on a heavy coat made from buffalo hide. His beard was a thick tangle of black and gray, and he stood near 6'7". This was Ryan Conincade. The folks around there just called him Bear. He lived way up in the Laramie Mountains, trapping for a living, and he did not come down to town too often. Ryan did not even look at Ransom. His eyes were on Vivian. He saw the little pulse hammering away in the side of her neck. He saw how her eyes got wide the second Ransom's chair scraped against the floorboards. "The debt is 50, Ryan asked, his voice a low rumble that you could feel in your chest. "This ain't your business, Mountain Man," Ransom warned, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his hip. Ryan reached inside his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch, slamming it down on the table. It made the solid, dull clink of pure gold nuggets. "That's a full 3 ounces of raw dust, worth $60 at the assay office. I'm settling his debt." Jedediah's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Done and sold. Colt Ransom looked mad enough to spit nails, but the man was not a fool. Ryan Conincade had a reputation for crushing skulls with his bare hands. Ransom spit a wad onto the floorboards, slid his pistol back into its holster, and swept up the remaining coins. "Have it your way, Bear, but do not plan on much conversation. That girl is broken." Her own father, Jedediah, was already snatching the gold, not even sparing a glance for his daughter. "Good riddance to her," he mumbled. "Just another useless mouth to feed." Ryan paid them no mind. He walked right over to Vivian. She stared up at him, her eyes filled with a whole new brand of fear. She was accustomed to cruel men, but this one was a giant. He looked like the mountain had decided to walk down and claim her for itself. He motioned for her to come with him. She paused for a moment, then gave a small nod. She had to stay in character. She could not let him discover she understood every word of the deal. They left the saloon and stepped into the bitter cold of the October night. A fierce wind howled down the main street, whipping up dirt. Ryan went to his horse, a massive Clydesdale mix he called Thunder. He swung up into the saddle with ease, then offered down a hand as scarred and rough as tree bark. Vivian reached up and took it. He pulled her up to sit behind him like she weighed less than nothing. As she got herself settled on the horse, grabbing onto the thick fur of his coat to keep her balance, she figured he would just spur the horse and take off. She figured he would just ignore her like everyone else. But he did not. Instead, Ryan turned his head just a little. He did not yell to be heard over the wind. He did not use any hand signs. He leaned back until his mouth was just inches from her ear, hidden by the big collar of his coat. "I saw you flinch when that chair moved," he whispered, his voice low and shockingly calm. "And I saw your eyes get wide when I said the word gold. I know you can hear me, little bird." Vivian's heart just stopped beating. She went completely still, her hands gripping his coat so tight her knuckles were white. She forgot to breathe. She did not say a word. Ryan did not seem to be waiting for an answer. He nudged the horse with his heels and they rode out of Cheyenne, heading straight for the dark, jagged peaks of the Laramie Mountains. Vivian was not her father's prisoner anymore. But now she was caught in a much scarier game, trapped in a lie that this mountain man had already seen right through. The ride up that mountain was a hard 3-day journey that pushed a person to their very limit. The higher they climbed out of Cheyenne, the thinner and colder the air got. For the first 6 hours, Vivian kept up her act like it was her religion. She made no sound. She did not cry out when the narrow trail dropped off into nothingness beside them. She just stared at the back of Ryan's massive coat, her mind spinning. Who was this man? Why would he pay so much money for her? And if he already knew she could hear, why had he not said anything else about it? Ryan Conincade was a complete mystery. Most of the men Vivian had ever been around, like her father and his gambling buddies, they filled every quiet moment with useless noise. They would brag or complain or curse. But Ryan was different. He was as quiet as the landscape itself. He moved with a purpose. When he'd stop to let the horse drink from a stream, he would check Vivian's boots to make sure they were tied tight against the biting cold. But he never tried to look her in the eye. They set up camp that first night in a little patch of aspen trees with a big rock wall blocking the wind. The sun went down, painting the whole sky in angry shades of purple and deep orange. Vivian sat by the small campfire, hugging her thin arms to her chest for warmth. She watched Ryan as he skinned a rabbit he'd caught in a snare. Every move he made was careful and exact. "Salt," Ryan said all of a sudden. He did not look over at her. He just said the word out loud in a normal speaking voice. Vivian was watching the flames. The little pouch of salt was sitting right beside her next to the saddlebags. Her first instinct was to grab it for him. Her whole body tensed up, and her hand moved just a little bit. But she stopped herself at the last second and made her hand move to scratch her leg instead. She did not even glance at the salt. She kept her eyes locked on the fire, pretending she had not heard a thing. Ryan let out a little chuckle. It was a dry, kind of rusty sound. He just reached over, picked up the salt himself, and sprinkled it on the meat. "You are good," he said softly, putting the rabbit on a stick over the fire. "Better than any of those card players back in town. But your breathing changes when you are listening. You hold it for a second just to make sure you catch the sound." Vivian gave no sign that she heard him. She could not. If she admitted he was right, she would lose the only thing that had ever kept her safe. If she was deaf, she was just a burden, and maybe he would get tired of her and let her go, but if she was a liar, then she was something dangerous. He handed her a piece of the cooked meat on a tin plate. She took it, giving a small nod of thanks. "My brother Elias. He was deaf," Ryan said, his eyes on the fire. He took a bite of meat and chewed it slow. "Lost his hearing from a cannon blast back in the war in '64. I learned how to talk with my hands for him. I learned how to watch a man's eyes." He finally looked right at Vivian, his dark eyes seeming to see right through her in the flickering firelight. "Elias, he had a certain peace in his eyes, you see, because the whole world had gone quiet for him." She ate her meal, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She had the urge to scream at him, to just make him stop. She desperately wanted to ask where in the world they were headed. Instead, she just kept chewing in silence. The second day on the trail was even tougher. A blizzard was brewing up north, making the sky a dark slate gray. The wind tore through the canyon, carrying tiny ice crystals that stung her skin like needles. They came to a dangerous pass folks called Dead Man's Drop. The path got so narrow it was barely 4 feet wide, with a straight 300-foot drop on one side and a sheer cliff face on the other. Ryan swung down from his saddle. "We are walking from here on out," he said, speaking more to the horse than to her. But he knew she was listening. He took the horse by the reins and led the way. Vivian followed behind Thunder, keeping her body pressed tight against the rock wall. The wind was a deafening roar up there, howling so loud you could likely feel the vibrations in your bones, even if you could not hear. All of a sudden, the horse lost its footing. A hidden patch of ice under the snow sent Thunder's back legs slipping right over the side. The huge animal went into a panic, letting out a terrified whinny and clawing to get a hold. The saddlebags lurched sideways, swinging wildly out over the empty air. "Whoa now, easy boy," Ryan bellowed, digging his heels into the ground. He used every bit of his incredible strength to wrench the horse's head back toward the cliff. But the animal's weight was just too great. Ryan started sliding toward the ledge, his boots finding no grip on the ice. Vivian watched it all unfold as if time had slowed down. A rope from a saddlebag had tangled around Ryan's wrist. If that horse went over, Ryan was going with it. "Let go of him," she wanted to scream at the top of her lungs. Ryan grunted, his face turning beet red from the strain. He was losing the fight. He was about to die. Without a second thought, Vivian moved. She did not try to grab Ryan. She knew she could not hold his weight. Instead, she snatched a sharp, jagged rock from the path and jammed it hard behind the horse's slipping back hoof, creating a solid block. Then she grabbed the horse's tail with both hands and pulled it toward the cliff wall with a surge of strength that came from pure adrenaline. "Hup! Get on up!" she screamed. The words tore from her throat before she even thought about it. Her voice was clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The horse's hoof found its footing on the rock she had placed, and the animal lunged forward, pulling itself back onto solid trail. Ryan tumbled backward into the snow, safe but gasping for breath. The horse just stood there, shivering with its head hung low. The wind kept howling all around them, but in the space between the man and the woman, there was a sudden, complete silence. Vivian just stood frozen, her chest heaving and her eyes wide with sheer terror. She had spoken out loud. She had shouted a command. The whole act was finished. Ryan pushed himself up slowly, wiping the snow out of his beard. He glanced at the horse, then over at the cliff's edge, and finally his eyes landed on Vivian. He did not look angry. He did not look like he had won anything. He just looked sad. "You saved my life," he said, his voice quiet as the wind tried to steal the words away. Vivian started backing up, pushing herself against the cold rock of the cliff wall, shaking her head no. She opened her mouth, wanting to talk, to plead with him, not to hurt her, but the fear locked her throat up tight once more. She fell back into the only defense she had ever known. She pointed a finger to her ear and shook her head, a desperate, pitiful try at taking it all back. Ryan got to his feet, a mountain of a man looming over her. He reached out a hand, not to hit her, but to gently pull her coat's hood over her head, shielding her ears from the biting cold. "We have got 5 miles to the cabin," he said, and all the teasing was gone from his voice. "We can talk about you being able to speak when we get there, or we can just keep quiet. But you understand this, Vivian Miller." He leaned in close, his face just inches away from hers. "I am not your father, and I am not Colt Ransom. You do not have to go hiding in the quiet when you are with me." He turned then and took hold of the horse's reins. "Let us get going." Vivian stood there for a long moment, frozen as tears turned to ice on her cheeks. He had not punished her. He had not gloated. He had offered her a choice. For the first time in 6 long years, her silence was not a prison cage. It was an open question. She wiped her face, pushed herself off the wall, and followed that giant of a man into the falling snow. The cabin was nothing like the shack Vivian had been imagining. Tucked into a cradle of granite right under the shadow of Laram Peak, it was a fortress built from hewn pine logs and riverstone. When Ryan nudged the heavy oak door open with his boot, a wave of warm air rolled out to greet them, smelling of dried sage, wood smoke, and old paper. He lit a kerosene lamp, and its yellow glow pushed back the dark corners. What she saw inside was a complete shock in how tidy it was. There were no heaps of rotting furs or gnawed-on bones. Instead, Vivian saw a massive stone hearth, a solid table with 2 chairs, and the biggest surprise of all, a wall filled with shelves of books. She saw leather-bound volumes of Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. Homer and Shakespeare were sitting right next to jars of dried herbs. "Well, this is it," Ryan grunted, shutting the door against the screaming wind. He did not look at her. He went straight to the hearth and started stirring the embers of a fire he had banked deep enough to last while he was gone. Vivian stayed by the door, shivering and pulling her thin shawl tighter around her. She felt like a trespasser inside a library that was built for a giant. "There is a cot for you in that back corner," Ryan said, pointing to a small alcove that was sectioned off by a hanging bear pelt. "It has got clean wool blankets. You can sleep there. I will take the floor here by the fire. It is easier on my back." He was setting the rules right then and there. There were no threats, no demands for her to come warm his bed. He treated her like a guest he had not exactly planned on having. For the next 3 weeks, a peculiar and heavy routine took hold in that cabin. The blizzard that had been threatening them on the trail finally hit with its full fury, burying the entire world under 6 feet of snow. They were completely snowed in, trapped. Vivian kept up her silence, but things had changed between them since what happened on that cliff. She knew that he knew, and he knew that she was aware of it. It was like a confusing game of chess being played without a single piece on the board. She started doing all the cooking. It was the only way she could think of to repay him for the food and the shelter without having to use her voice. She located his supplies, flour, dried deer meat, a sack of onions, and started working miracles with them. She baked biscuits that came out fluffy instead of being hard as a rock. She cooked up stews that were rich and flavorful, using the very herbs he had collected. One evening, around the middle of November, all that unspoken tension finally came to a head. They were sitting and eating their supper. The wind was shrieking outside, making the heavy shutters rattle. Ryan was busy reading a copy of Great Expectations, his big finger following the words on the page. "You hum when you cook," Ryan said, not even looking up from his book. Vivian froze, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. She had no idea she was even doing it. It was a habit from her childhood before her mother passed away, a small noise she made to comfort herself. Ryan turned a page. It is a low sound, sort of like a bee buzzing in a jar. My brother Elias, he used to make little noises too. Folks who cannot hear sometimes do that, because they do not know how loud they are being. But you, he finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. You hum perfectly in tune. You were humming the same song that piano player was hammering out at the Iron Horse the night I bought you. Vivian's hand began to shake. She set her spoon down. The quiet in the cabin suddenly felt stretched thin and brittle as ice. "Why do you keep this up, Vivian?" Ryan asked, his voice dropping to a low, rumbling whisper. "There is nobody here but the wind and the wolves. Is my voice so awful that you cannot stand to answer it?" Vivian just stared at him, feeling her throat tighten up. It was not that she had no desire to speak. It was that she had forgotten what it felt like to trust her own voice. For 6 long years, talking had only ever brought her pain. If she spoke, she was visible. If she was visible, she could be hurt. She shot up from her chair so fast it scraped loudly on the floor, and she hurried over to the wash basin. She aggressively scrubbed the plates with her back to him, her shoulders trembling. She heard Ryan let out a deep sigh, the sound of his chair shifting, then his heavy footsteps coming up behind her. He stopped about 3 feet away. He did not touch her. "I was a sheriff once," he said to her back. "In Kansas, before the war changed everything. Before it changed me." Vivian paused, her scrubbing. That was a piece of information she never would have guessed. A lawman. "I have interrogated liars, thieves, and killers," Ryan continued. "I know the difference between a lie someone tells for profit and a lie someone tells just to survive. You are holding on to that silence like it is a shield, Vivian, but shields get heavy." He waited. When she did not turn around, he walked back to the fire. "I'm not going to ask you again," he said, and the finality in his voice was unmistakable. "You'll talk when you're good and ready, but till then, don't you think for a second I don't see you." Later that night, as Vivian lay on the cot tucked into the alcove, she stared at the rough-hewn timbers of the ceiling. She breathed a single word, so quiet the silence itself barely heard it. Ryan. The name felt foreign on her tongue. It had weight. It was real. December of 1882 brought a chill so deep it felt like it could stop time in its tracks. The snow outside was packed down solid enough to hold a man's weight. Inside the cabin, life had started to thaw. The sharp edges of their strangeness with each other were slowly wearing smooth. Vivian had started finding new ways to communicate. A double tap on the table meant supper was ready. A simple point toward the wood bin meant it was running low. Ryan, for his part, had taken to reading to her in the evenings. He never asked if she wanted him to. He would just clear his throat and begin the tale of the Odyssey. His voice, which was usually as coarse as burlap, would find a steady, calming rhythm as he spoke of monsters and long journeys toward home. Viven would sit near the hearth, darning his socks, hanging on every word, and feeling the deep rumble of his voice through the floorboards. One morning, Ryan was getting ready to check the trap line. He wrestled on his thick buffalo coat and strapped a heavy Colt Navy revolver low on his hip. "I ought to be back by sundown," he said to her. "Keep this door barred tight. The wolves are getting mighty hungry this year." Viven just nodded her head. She watched him push out into the endless white, a lone, dark figure against the blinding snow. Well, sundown came and went, and he was not back. By the time the moon climbed high in the sky, a cold fear started to gnaw at Viven's stomach. Ryan was a capable man. She knew that much was true. But the mountains, they do not care one bit about how capable you are. A snowslide, a hidden crack in the ice, a whole pack of timber wolves. Death was hiding everywhere out there. She paced the floor of the tiny cabin. She would check the fire. Then she would check the window. Finally, at midnight, she heard something. It was not the steady crunch of boots in the snow, but a dragging kind of sound. A heavy thud came up against the door. Viven threw the bolt and pulled the heavy door open. Ryan collapsed right over the threshold. He was awake, but his face was a pale gray and his lips were blue from the cold. His left leg was a terrible mess of denim soaked through with blood. "Bear trap," he gritted out, his teeth chattering something fierce. "Hidden under the snow, not mine. Some poachers." Viven did not freeze. The wave of panic that usually turned her to stone was just gone, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. She grabbed him right under the arms. He felt like dead weight, nearly 260 pounds of solid muscle and bone. But pure adrenaline gave her the strength of 10 women. She dragged him toward the fire, grunting from the sheer effort. She kicked the door shut and slid the latch home. "Whiskey," Ryan groaned out, clutching his leg and the knife. Viven worked fast. She pulled the heavy coat off of him. She cut away his pant leg. The wound was awful. The iron teeth of the trap had torn deep into his calf muscle. It missed the bone, but it shredded the flesh. It was bleeding slow, the blood coming out dark and thick. She poured whiskey right over the open wound. Ryan let out a roar of pure agony that seemed to shake the rafters, his head slamming back against the floorboards. The pain was so great that he passed out cold. Viven did not stop. She threaded a needle with some heavy thread she had soaked in alcohol. She knew she had to stitch it closed before he lost any more blood. Her hands, which were usually so timid, were steady as a rock now. She did not treat him like he was her master. She treated him like a patient. She worked for a whole hour, cleaning, stitching, and bandaging. When she finally finished, she built the fire up into a blaze to fight off the shock setting into his body. She could not lift him to the cot, so she brought all the blankets to him, piling them high on top of his shivering body. She sat right there beside him the whole night, wiping the sweat from his brow with a cool, damp rag. Around 3 a.m, Ryan began to stir. His fever was climbing. He started to mumble, lost in a haze of pain and old memories. "Do not do it, Elias," he whispered, his hand grabbing Viven's wrist with a force that could leave a bruise. "Do not go into that cornfield. They are waiting for you." Viven did not pull her hand away. She just stroked his rough knuckles with her thumb. "I cannot hear them, Ryan," he mumbled on, thinking he was talking to his brother who had passed. "It is too quiet. Why is it so quiet?" Viven leaned in close. She put her hand on his burning cheek. She had to bring him back to the here and now. She had to pull him away from the ghosts of 1864. "I am here," she whispered. It was the very first time she had spoken directly to him. Ryan's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy and they could not focus, but they found her face. "Vivian, I am here," she said again, her voice a little raspy from not being used, but it was stronger this time. "You are safe. I have got you." Ryan looked at her with a mix of confusion and pure wonder. You, you spoke. Sleep, Ryan. He closed his eyes and his breathing began to even out as the fever started to break, just a little. Knew you could, he muttered, right before he drifted off. The next 2 days were a blur of her nursing him back to health. Vivian changed his bandages. She forced broth down his throat, and she kept the fire roaring day and night. The entire feeling in that cabin had flipped completely. He was now the one who was helpless. She was the one protecting him. On the 3rd day, Ryan was sitting up, propped against the leg of the table. He looked pale and weaker than she had ever seen him, but his mind was finally clear. Vivian was at the counter chopping carrots. The silence had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not a wall between them. It felt more like a bridge. "Who taught you how to stitch a wound like that?" Ryan asked. Vivian turned around. She did not use her hands to sign. She did not stare at the floor. She looked him straight in the eye. "My mother," she said. Her voice was soft and a little hoarse, but it was steady. "She was a seamstress before she took ill." Ryan let out a long, slow breath, and a small smile touched his lips. "Well, it is a fine voice, Vivian Miller. A darn fine voice, worth waiting for." Vivian felt a warm blush creep up her neck. "You talk too much," she said, with just a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. Ryan laughed, but it turned into a cough. "I suppose I do." The moment was warm, almost comfortable, but it was shattered by a sound that had no business being up in these high mountains. A gunshot. It echoed off the canyon walls, far away but clear as a bell. And then came another one. Ryan's face turned hard in an instant. All the softness was gone. He reached for his Colt Navy, checking the cylinder out of habit. "That is a Winchester rifle," he said, his voice dropping low and serious. "Poachers do not use repeaters, and they sure do not fire warning shots." Vivian moved to the window, peeking through a tiny crack in the shutter. Down in the valley, about a mile off, she could see 3 black dots on the white snow. Riders. They were moving slow, like they were tracking something. "Is it them?" she asked, her voice starting to tremble. "Is it my father?" Ryan pulled himself up into a sitting position, wincing as his bad legs screamed in protest. "Your father does not have the backbone to come all the way up here, and he sure does not have the money to hire men who do." He looked right at Vivian, his expression turning dark. "Did you take anything, Vivian, when you left that saloon? Anything at all?" Vivian shook her head. "Just my clothes." "Think," Ryan commanded. "Ransom is a businessman. He would not chase a $50 debt into a blizzard. He is chasing something worth a whole lot more than gold." Vivian's hand went to her pocket. For weeks, she had been carrying a small, heavy object she found in her father's coat the night before the card game. She had taken it to hide it, thinking he would just gamble it away. She had forgotten all about it in the terror of being sold. She pulled it out. It was a heavy silver pocket watch, but when she clicked it open, there was no clock face inside. Instead, there was a folded piece of paper covered with numbers and coordinates. Ryan took the watch. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. His face went pale. "This is not a debt," Ryan whispered. "This is a map. A map to the Union Army payroll shipment that went missing back in '65. Ransom did not just want his money. Vivian. He thinks you stole the location of a fortune." He looked out at the 3 riders moving steadily up the slope. "They are not coming to take you back," Ryan said, cocking the hammer of his revolver. "They are coming to bury us both." The silence that fell after Ryan spoke was heavier than the snow piling up outside the cabin. The map, all crinkled and yellow with age, sat on the table between them like a coiled rattlesnake. Ryan did not waste a single second on comforting words. The change in him was instant. The gentle giant who read books by the fire was gone, replaced by the sheriff he used to be. Even with the fire in his leg, he dragged himself across the floor and blew out the kerosene lamp. The cabin was suddenly plunged into a gray, filtered twilight, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace and the winter sun seeping through the cracks. "Listen to me, and listen good," Ryan whispered, his voice like grinding stone. "Ransom brought 3 men. That means he is serious, but he is also arrogant. He thinks I am just some trapper. He thinks you are a helpless girl who cannot speak. That is our advantage." He handed Vivian the heavy Winchester 1873 rifle. The cold steel bit into her palms. "Do you know how to use this thing?" Vivian shook her head, her hands trembling. "Well, you're about to learn right now." For the next 10 minutes, the only sound in the cabin was the metallic click-clack of the lever action. Ryan showed her exactly what to do, how to load the brass cartridges into the side, how to work the lever to put a round in the chamber, and how to ease the hammer down safely. He was patient, but there was a fire in his voice. "It kicks like a mule," he warned her. "Tuck it in tight against your shoulder. Do not close your eyes when you pull the trigger. If you close your eyes, you will miss. If you miss, we die." Vivian nodded. The weight of the rifle felt strange, like an instrument of death, in hands that had only ever known how to mend clothes or scrub floors. But when she looked at Ryan's pale, sweat-soaked face, she knew he could not fight this battle by himself. His leg was swollen up, the infection fighting against the whiskey he'd used on it. He was the mind of this fight. She would have to be the muscle. They barricaded the door with the heavy oak table. Vivian dragged sacks of flour and dried beans over to the windows, making little forts to shoot from. An hour crawled by. The wind howled outside, covering up any sound of their approach. The waiting was pure agony. Every creak of the cabin's timber sounded like a footstep. Every shadow that moved looked like a gunman. Then a voice cut through the wind. It was smooth, loud, and terrifyingly familiar. "Ryan Kincaid," Colt Ransom was shouting from the tree line, hidden behind the thick pine trunks about 50 yards out. "I know you are in there, Bear. And I know you have got the girl. Now, I do not have a quarrel with you. Just send the girl out with her father's pocket watch, and you can go right back to skinning beavers. I will even leave you a horse." Ryan motioned for Vivian to stay down near the back window. He got himself into position near a crack in the front logs. His Colt Navy revolver was resting steady on a bag of beans. "The girl stays," Ryan bellowed back. His voice was a thunderclap, hiding any sign of his weakness. "And the watch stays, too. You want them, you come and get them." Ransom laughed. It was a dry, empty sound. "Don't you be a fool, Quince Cade. She is damaged goods. Her own father sold her off in a poker game. Are you really going to die for a mute girl who is too stupid to even speak?" Vivian flinched. The words were like salt in old wounds. She looked at Ryan. He did not look back at her. His eyes were fixed on the tree line, his jaw set in a line of pure cold fury. "She speaks when she has something worth saying," Ryan shouted, "which is more than I can say for you, Ransom." Silence filled the woods. Then came a single sharp crack. A bullet slammed into the log wall just inches from Ryan's head, sending splinters flying through the air. "Get down," Ryan hissed. The siege was on. Bullets began to hammer the cabin. They were not shooting to kill just yet. They were trying to pin them down. The wood of the cabin splintered and groaned under the heavy impact of the rounds. One bullet punched clean through a weak spot in the wall, smashing a jar of dried herbs on the shelf. Glass and sage exploded all over the floor. "They are moving," Ryan said, tracking them through the crack. "2 of them on the left flank. Ransom is staying in the center. They want to get us in a crossfire." He turned to Vivian. She was huddled under the back window, clutching the rifle. Her eyes were wide, filled with the terror of a trapped animal. "Vivian," Ryan barked. It was not a whisper. It was a direct command. The back window. If they get behind the woodshed, they can burn us out. You have to stop them." "I can't," she screamed, the first time she had ever raised her voice in terror. "I cannot kill a man." Ryan dragged himself toward her, ignoring the blood that was seeping through his bandages. He grabbed her by the shoulder. "You are not killing a man," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "You are stopping a monster from walking through that door. Look at me. If they get in here, Vivian, you know what they will do to you. And to me." He squeezed her shoulder. "You saved me on the cliff. I need you to save me now." Vivian swallowed down a sob. She nodded her head. She turned back to the window, peering through the small gap between the shutters. She saw movement. A man in a long duster coat was sprinting from tree to tree, closing in on the woodshed that sat 20 yards behind the cabin. He was carrying a bundle of rags and a bottle. Kerosene. He was going to burn them alive. Vivian lifted the rifle. It felt heavy in her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they would bruise. She remembered Ryan's voice in her head. "Tuck it in tight. Do not close your eyes." She aligned the iron sights. The man stopped to crouch behind a stump. She held her breath. The entire world narrowed down to that small V in the metal sight and the dark figure out there in the snow. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard, slamming back into her shoulder. The noise was deafening in the small space. She missed the man, but the bullet struck the frozen stump inches from his face, exploding the bark. The man yelled out, falling backward into the snow and dropping the bottle. He scrambled back on his hands and knees, terrified by the sudden resistance, and retreated to the tree line. "I missed," Vivian gasped, working the lever with shaking hands. "You turned him back," Ryan grunted, firing 2 shots from his revolver toward the front. "That is as good as a kill right now. Good girl. Keep watching." The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. The temperature plummeted. "Why did they stop?" Vivian whispered. "They are regrouping," Ryan said, reloading his cylinder with agonizing slowness. "They realized we are not easy pickings. They will wait for dark. Ransom is a coward, but he is patient. He will wait until we are cold and tired." They sat in the dark. Vivian moved to Ryan, checking his leg. The bleeding had slowed, but his skin was burning hot. The fever was coming back. "If I pass out," Ryan murmured, his voice slurring slightly, "you take the revolver and you hold the door. You understand?" "You are not going to black out," Vivian commanded, tearing a long strip from her underskirt to cinch the wound on his leg. "You still owe me the ending of that book." A dry, weak laugh came from Ryan. "Reckon I do, don't I?" Outside, the wind gave up its fight. A deep silence fell over the land, but this quiet was full of bad intentions. Vivian leaned her back against the log wall, the rifle resting across her thighs. She was no longer the hunted spirit of the cabin. She was the sentinel. As the moon climbed higher, casting a silvery sheen across the killing ground, a powerful truth settled in her. For the first time in all her years, she was not waiting for someone else to ride in and save her. The fire began around midnight. It did not explode into life. It announced itself with a gentle bump on the roof. Vivian's gaze shot upward as a fine powder of dust drifted from the high beams. What in the world was that? Ryan, who had been floating in and out of sense, was jolted awake by the sound. He tested the air. "Pitch," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "That's burning pitch." A second bump landed, heavier this time. Then came a brittle crackling, like walking on a carpet of autumn leaves. A menacing orange flicker began to pulse through the gaps between the roof planks. "They're heaving torches up on the roof," Ryan explained, groaning as he tried to sit. "They're not coming in for a fight. They aim to smoke us out." Tendrils of thick, bitter smoke began to curl down from the ceiling. It was not the pleasant smell of the hearth. It was the choking stench of burning tar and pine. "We have to leave," Vivian said, coughing. She grabbed Ryan's arm. We have to get to the barn. Thunder is there. If we can get on the horse. I cannot ride, Vivian, Ryan said, his voice grim. Not with this leg. I will only slow you down. You take the horse. I will cover you from the door. Vivian stopped. She looked at the man who had bought her, not to own her, but to free her. The man who had listened to her silence. No, she said. It was a single word, hard as iron. She grabbed his arm and hauled him up. He groaned, putting weight on his bad leg, but she wedged her shoulder under his armpit. She was small, but years of hard labor under her father had given her a deceptive core strength. We go together, she hissed, or we burn together. Ryan looked at her, stunned by her ferocity. He nodded. Together. The roof was roaring now. Heat radiated down, blistering their skin. The cabin was filling with black smoke. The back door, Ryan coughed. It is closer to the barn. On 3. He leaned heavily on her. They stumbled to the back door. Vivian unbarred it. She could hear the fire eating the wood above them. 1, 2, 3. Vivian kicked the door open. The cold air rushed in, feeding the fire and causing a whoosh of flame above them. They stumbled out into the snow, into the blinding darkness. There! A voice shouted by the door. A gunshot rang out. A bullet whizzed past Vivian's ear, snapping a twig on a nearby bush. Run! Ryan roared, shoving her forward, trying to limp faster. They scrambled toward the barn 30 yards away. The snow was knee-deep, making every step a nightmare. Ryan was dragging his leg, grunting with every movement. Another shot. This one hit Ryan. He did not scream. He just grunted a wet, heavy sound and pitched forward into the snow. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Ryan! Vivian screamed. She dropped the rifle and fell to her knees beside him. Go! Ryan gasped, clutching his shoulder. Blood was dark against the white snow. I am done, Vivian. Get to the horse. From the darkness, figures were emerging. 3 of them. They were walking slowly now, confident. The cabin behind them was a towering inferno, casting a hellish orange light over the scene. Vivian looked at the approaching men. She looked at the barn 10 yards away. She looked at Ryan, bleeding in the snow. She did not run. She grabbed Ryan's collar and dragged him. She screamed with effort, her boots slipping on the ice. She dragged him foot by foot, fueled by pure desperation. Get up! She shrieked. Ryan, spurred by her will, forced himself to his knees. He pushed. She pulled. They tumbled into the dark sanctuary of the barn, just as a bullet splintered the door frame. Vivian slammed the heavy barn door shut and dropped the wooden latch. They were trapped, but they were alive. Inside, Thunder the Clydesdale was panicking, kicking at his stall, smelling the smoke and sensing the fear. Ryan slumped against a hay bale. He was fading fast. He had 2 wounds now, and the blood loss was critical. Vivian, he whispered. The floorboards. Under the tack box. Vivian scrambled to the heavy wooden box in the corner where Ryan kept the saddles. She shoved it aside. Beneath it was a loose floorboard. What is it? She asked, prying it up. Dynamite, Ryan whispered. From the mines. 3 sticks. Vivian stared at the red sticks wrapped in oil paper. Outside, Ransom's voice drifted through the cracks. He was close, right outside the door. Nowhere left to run, little bird, Ransom taunted. The cabin is gone. The barn is next. Come out, and maybe I will let you live long enough to tell me where the gold is. Vivian looked at Ryan. He was holding his Colt Navy, but his hand was shaking so badly he could not aim. He looked at her with eyes full of apology. I am sorry, he whispered. I wanted to give you a life. I only gave you a grave. Vivian picked up the dynamite. She looked at the fuse. She looked at the lucifer, matches on the shelf. Then she looked at the back wall of the barn. The wood was old and rotted near the bottom. Behind it was the steep slope of the mountain, covered in a thick blanket of unstable snow. She remembered the map. She remembered the coordinates, but mostly she remembered the sound of the avalanche she had heard weeks ago in the distance. She crawled over to Ryan. She took the gun from his shaking hand. She did not aim it at the door. "You did not give me a grave, Ryan," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "You gave me a voice." She kissed his forehead. It was a goodbye and a promise. "Cover your head," she ordered. Vivian got to her feet. She struck the match. She touched the flame to the dynamite's short fuse. "Ransom!" she hollered, her voice cutting through the night, sharper than the fire, louder than the wind. "I am right here, darling," Ransom cackled, taking a step toward the cabin door. "This gold is not yours," Vivian shouted. "It belongs to the mountain." She did not aim the dynamite at the door. She hurled it toward the back wall of the barn, aiming for the base of the main support beams, right beneath the heavy snowpack hanging on the cliff high above. She then dove toward Ryan, covering his huge frame with her own small one, burying her face deep into his fur coat. The blast was not a sound. It was a physical punch that seemed to break the world apart. The barn's back walls simply ceased to exist, but that explosion was just the beginning. Far above them, the great slab of snow, shaken by the shockwave, fractured. A deep rumble started somewhere in the belly of the earth, quickly swelling to a roar that swallowed the sounds of the fire and the gunshots. The white death was thundering down the mountain. Ransom, who was standing just outside the door, glanced up. His grin evaporated. He spun around to flee. But you can't outrun gravity. The avalanche slammed into the barn with the power of a runaway freight train. The entire world just ended in a blast of white. The mountain's roar was so immense it was no longer a sound but a vibration that shook the very marrow in their bones. And then, just as fast as that fury was unleashed, it was gone. There was only darkness, a complete and crushing blackness. Vivian coughed, the air thick with dust and the scent of splintered pine. She was alive. She found herself pinned under the heavy buffalo coat, with Ryan's enormous arm draped over her like a bar of steel. The barn had caved in, but the massive oak beams from the hayloft had fallen in a V shape against the stone wall, creating a small pocket of air, no bigger than the inside of a carriage. "Ryan," she whispered. The answering silence was terrifying. "I'm here," he groaned out. His voice was faint and thick with pain. "Legs are broken again." They were buried beneath 20 feet of snow and timber. For 2 long days they stayed in that frozen tomb. They lived off the shared warmth of their bodies, and the few handfuls of snow Vivian could scoop through a small opening in the wreckage. In that total darkness, there were no more secrets left to keep. Ryan, lost in a fever, told her of the war, and of the quietness of his lost brother. Vivian told him about the songs her mother used to sing, and she sang them softly there in the dark, trying to keep him anchored to the world of the living. On the morning of the 3rd day, a single beam of light broke through the gloom. Their horse, Thunder, had somehow survived in his stall on the other side of the collapse, and his constant kicking had loosened the packed snow. It took Vivian 4 hours to claw out a tunnel just wide enough for them to crawl through. When they finally pulled themselves out, gasping in the blinding glare of the Wyoming winter, the whole landscape had been remade. The valley was simply gone, filled in and smoothed over with white. The smoldering ruins of the cabin were buried, and of Colt Ransom and his crew, there was not a trace. The mountain had collected its debt. They limped their way down the mountain, Vivian now supporting the giant of a man who had once carried her. It took them a full week to make it to the settlement at Fort Laramie. Spring arrived in Wyoming in 1883 with a sudden, fierce bloom of wildflowers. High up in a different range, the Wind River Mountains, a new cabin stood. It was smaller than the last one, but was built with the very same attention and care. On the porch sat Ryan Kincaid. He now walked with a limp that would never leave him, a hickory cane resting against his knee. He was busy whittling a small piece of cedar. The door creaked open, and Vivian came out. She was no longer dressed in rags. She wore a simple blue dress with her hair neatly braided down her back. She was carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. She set it down and then sat on the porch railing, gazing out across the valley. "That trader swung by today," Ryan said, testing the blade of his knife with his thumb. Said he heard a rumor about a lost Union Army payroll. Folks are saying the map to it was lost in an avalanche over by Laramie Peak. Vivian reached into her dress pocket. She pulled out the heavy silver watch. The folded paper inside it was long gone. She had used it as kindling to start their very first fire on that freezing night in the snow cave. The gold did not matter. The map did not matter. She tossed the empty silver watch over to Ryan. He caught it. Letting out a low chuckle. "Let them look," Vivian said. Her voice was steady, strong, and certain. "We have everything we could ever need right here." Ryan smiled, and the lines around his eyes crinkled. He reached over and took her hand in his. The silent ghost from Cheyenne was gone. In her place stood a woman who had discovered her voice in the quiet heart of a winter storm. And beside her was the man who had taken the time to listen when the rest of the world had turned away. They did not need any gold. They had the quiet. And this time, it was a silence they had chosen together. And that, folks, is the legend of Vivian Miller and Bear Kincaid. While the history books might not write their names down next to Billy, the Kid, or Wyatt Earp, the local folks in Wyoming still tell the story of the avalanche lovers. Some will tell you that if you hike up Laramie Peak today, you can still see the rotten timbers of an old barn poking out from the earth, and that buried somewhere deep beneath the rock and snow is a Colt revolver and a greed that cost 3 men everything. Vivian and Ryan proved that the most powerful things in life are not gunshots or shiny gold coins. The most powerful thing is the truth we speak to the people who matter most. Vivian spent 6 years in silence just to survive a monster. But she finally broke that silence to save a good man. In the end, he did not save her because she was helpless. He saved her because he was the only one who ever cared enough to listen. So, what do you think? Would you have thrown that stick of dynamite and risked it all, or would you have just tried to make a run for it? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please go on and hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow, and it tells me you want more of these true-to-life dramas from the Old West. And if you have not done it already, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story from the frontier. Thanks for listening, and I will see y'all in the next video. Stay wild. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.